So our first speaker today is Shaku Nair at the Arizona Pest Management Center, University of Arizona in Maricopa, Arizona. She is an associate in extension focused on community integrated pest management. She did her undergraduate work at Kerala Agriculture University in India and a master's and PhD at the University of Georgia. Her responsibilities there at the Arizona Pest Management Center include research on pest management and community education focused on school IPM, especially in Arizona. And she also does work on public health pests of public health concern, so things like bed bugs, mosquitoes, and venomous arthropods. And today she will talk about school IPM in the age of COVID. Take it away, Shaku.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. And thank you to the Western IPM Center for this great opportunity. I think this is the IPM Hour is a great effort to connect all of our colleagues in the Western region and outside actually, and learn about what everyone's doing, especially at this time of COVID. So yeah, I like to, my presentation, start my presentation today. So yeah, my topic is schools in the time of COVID. And like I was saying, the second part of my title, more questions than answers. I'm sure that's how we all feel about the general scheme of things at this time. So I'd like to start my presentation with another question. Okay, why is school important? And I'm sure we all know that, but I like to ask whenever I talk about school IPM, which I do talk about a lot, being involved with the Arizona School IPM program. I like to start with this question: why is school important, and why is school IPM important? And the answer, of course, is children, because children spend a major part of their day at school, and anything that occurs at school with regards to pests and pest management certainly affects children in a major way. And that's why school IPM is important. But at this time, COVID time, when schools were closed, more parents and guardians than ever before are recognizing and realizing the value of schools, the importance of schools. And there are so many memes about this that I'm sure everyone's come across. I just want to share a couple of them here. Just the importance of schools. There's so many parents that are saying, thank you to the teachers. Thank you for taking care of the kids during the day. Schools house kids for major part of the day so that parents and other adults can pursue their other activities like jobs and careers and just get on with their lives. But this, and the other quote, I'm so done being part of this major historical event. I'm sure every one of us agrees with that as well. So just wanted to make the point that, all of those families that have suddenly been faced with this challenge of sheltering at home away from school and other environments has raised so many unprecedented challenges, and not only at home, but also schools. So these closures, the sudden and indefinite closures, have certainly been problematic for schools. They have had little or no time to conduct the usual end of year cleanups or maintenance activities, landscape and otherwise of the indoor environments. There has been no graduation, so no prepping up of the school towards the end of the school year, nothing like that. And additionally, lots of instructions have been going around ever since the start of March. Most schools closed in March, right? And just reopened at least partially in August. So lots of instructions have been going around, guidelines from various sources, various organizations, and school staff are just dealing with all of that, along with coping with the stress of their own stresses living with the pandemic. Their own concerns about their jobs, their families, all of that. So it's just been a really challenging time. And what happened to all of the pests when the schools were closed? So the first part of my presentation is just going to focus on some of the pest issues that we have encountered. People asking questions and ourselves going, we were on a school site, what we've observed. So I just want to share that. So there's this group of pests called outdoor invaders. So they're essentially outdoor pests, and but they will certainly wander indoors at some point, searching for food and other resources. And if they find a steady source and conditions are favorable inside, then they'll actually live there for a while, for quite a while. And ants are great examples of these. Outdoor invaders, they're great at finding stashed food. It's unbelievable how quickly they detect the presence of such stashed piles, way before we can ever even think of doing that. Just think of a pop spill in a school cafeteria. Who gets there first, right? It's the ants. And same with American cockroaches. They are great outdoor invaders too. They're essentially outdoor cockroaches, but they will wander in. If there is an entry point, they usually wander in through sewer lines and floor drains. And at this time, when the peat traps in those drains have dried up because of no use for several months, it's a great entry point for American cockroaches to come in, and then they will also thrive indoors for a while. More outdoor invaders, rodents and other vertebrates will readily forage, we all know this, in school dumpsters. And not all school dumpsters were emptied at the time of the closure when it started. And also garbage pickup has been affected in many places. So that has led to colonization of those dumpsters and those areas, trash disposal areas, by many rodents and other vertebrate pests. And certain other situations, though, additionally, that happened were when school campuses closed down, a lot of neighborhoods and other people actually use school dumpsters to dispose trash. So it's not that they were, ever since the closed down, those dumpsters were never used. They were used by other people. That led to possibly a steady supply of food in those areas, and that's why these pests would never leave. And this could be by neighborhoods, nearby neighborhoods. It could be by families that were evicted, which is very sad. And a lot of that has happened at this time. Animal shelters have closed down, leading to many more animals out on the streets and in neighborhoods looking for food and other resources. So all of that is connected to observations, these kinds of observations. So there are certainly squirrels and rats and other rodents, of course. There's raccoons reported from different parts of the country, coyote, feral cats and dogs, all of that. And I believe even bears and other wildlife also have been reported. Birds are also outdoor invaders that will readily nest in some indoor and outdoor spaces, and can cause quite a nuisance when it's time for people to come back. More outdoor invaders, bees and wasps, can start nests in attic spaces, under eaves of buildings and other places like that. Usually when the closure actually occurred right at when swarming time started. And usually when there's people around, when staff are around in school buildings, people notice when a swarm arrives, and steps can be taken before the swarm starts to colonize a space in a building. But when there's no one around, there's nothing to stop them. And by the time people notice, it's too late, and the colony has already been established in a building. So that is a common observation. Also paper wasps and other wasps that build nests in certain secluded spots, which is okay. But if that spot is right above an external doorway, for example, that is a problem. So things like that have certainly been observed. Now let's look at a few indoor infestors. These pests are certainly not outdoor pests, but actually thrive indoors. They are essentially indoor pests. They can certainly be brought in on shipment and other objects, but they're essentially indoor pests, and stored product pests are great examples of these. These thrive in any kind of stored food products like cereal, beans, pasta, etc. And many school buildings, many classrooms actually use much of these food items for not just for consumption, but also artwork or other projects that students are involved in. And there was no time to dispose of them or store them properly when the closure happened. So these are great breeding grounds for stored product pests. Another very common spot for stored product pests is the school kitchen and the pantry. And in many school kitchens, there's a flour bin or a baker's bin. And it doesn't have a close fitting lid because it's used so frequently. And it's just a flap that falls on top of the bin. And many times that lid is broken. So that creates a great opportunity also for stored product pests. So that is a very common observation at this time. Termites are another group that are very, very problematic. Typically, they will thrive in the moist or damaged wood. So if there has been a leak, for example, somewhere that went unnoticed, that led to softening of the wood, that's a great target spot for termites to breed, start a new colony. Subterranean termites have also been active. I have received inquiries from some of our program schools about what we should be looking for and what steps to take. So termites are certainly out there this time. A few other indoor infestors that are problematic are commensal rodents. And house mice are a great example of these indoor infestors. They are essentially indoor pests, house mice. They will not survive very well outdoors actually. And they love the human interaction. They like it there. But even when they have sufficient resources, they can survive. They need little or no water at all. They need very little food, and extremely prolific they are. They will reproduce at an alarming rate. And if infestations are left unnoticed and unchecked, very soon when the reopening time comes, you'll have an explosion of mice. That's very, very common, and it's reported also in places. So that's about commensal rodents. And all of those pests that I discussed so far actually don't really need human interaction. They don't need, they thrive when there are no people around. They're happy. But some pests, they need that the steady supply of resources that humans provide in terms of food and water. So some great examples of these kinds of indoor pests are German cockroaches. German cockroaches, filth flies like house flies, fruit flies, and drain flies. All of these pests, they rapidly multiply and increase for a short period, and utilize all of those resources that are available. But when water runs out, especially water, that's critical to them. And of course, the food supplies also, they'll die. They'll die and pile up in large numbers. As you can see here, there's hundreds of dead German cockroaches behind that refrigerator. And in the sink picture to the bottom right of the slide, you can see how drain flies have piled up, dead drain flies have piled up inside a sink because they were breeding inside the drain, the organic matter in the drain. And similarly, fruit flies, they breed in organic matter because they need the moist organic matter for their larvae. The larvae need a certain amount of moisture to survive. When that runs out, they'll die. So, but these piles can be very important clues, okay, to entry points and breeding sites also. So that is just a very quick overview of all of the different pest situations that we've encountered at this COVID time. And I reached out to all of our program schools that partner with us in developing school IPM programs. And what I found was that schools that follow IPM have an IPM plan or a policy in place had a very much better handle on the situation. They did not panic. They included the COVID protocol as part of their regular IPM protocol. They provided extra training for employees that needed them and made physical changes to help control the potential spread of the virus. All of that along with their regular duties. And some interesting things that some of our schools did was, building their own plexiglass barriers, which I thought was very, very nice. They found that they were much cheaper and better made also. Some established unidirectional pedestrian traffic through offices and other walkways. Some implemented checkerboard patterns for seating students. So these are some of the things that our school districts have been doing. Many of our IPM coordinators use the closure time very wisely to conduct additional inspections and keep up the monitoring for pests. And these schools also had better access to correct information and training opportunities also. So definitely school IPM, for schools that practice school IPM, it has not been such a big challenge as opposed to those that did not practice IPM. We received many calls from schools that did not practice IPM. They were panicking and asking questions about what should we do, what equipment to buy, what products should we use, all of that. So yeah, just like I was mentioning before, the piles of dead insects. Some schools used the closure time very wisely to observe, do thorough inspections of their facilities. And when piles of dead insects were found, they were important clues to entry points or breeding sites. That was a very good observation. I cover more questions than answers. Remember, in my title, I mentioned the second part of my title is more questions than answers. And there's certainly a lot of questions here. And I just want to share some of the disinfection related questions that we received in the context of COVID and schools. And I'll share the question and also the resources that we've been recommending. So one of the most common questions is, what is the chain of transmission of COVID and how best to break it? And here's a great resource from the Informed Green Solutions. It's a great infographic. They recommend a 3-pronged strategy to break the chain, which involves personal hygiene and social distancing, of course, managing airborne transmission and cleaning for health and targeted disinfection. So that's a great strategy to share. Another question is, and also one of the most common, is what is the EPA list N? And it's a list, of course, it's a list of all products that meet EPA's criteria for use against the virus, the COVID virus, which is SARS-CoV-2. And the list is available on the EPA website. Of course, there's a page. And the thing to remember about EPA list 10 is that it includes the primary EPA registered product formulation. But the formulations are given different product names many times. So it's a better idea to search using the registration number that's found on the label. So it's something that we've been talking to people about. Another question is how to use the list, how to use EPA's list 10. And again, EPA has a tool specifically for this. It's called the list 10 tool. It's also another resource that we've been sharing. And in that, there's a search feature where you can search products by different keywords, for example, active ingredient, contact time, where the product is going to be used, etc. So it's a very, very helpful tool to have. Another disinfectant related question is when to clean and when to disinfect. And this is not just for schools, but we also get a lot of these kinds of questions from other community environments, residences, and other organizations, buildings and such. So this is a great resource that we recommend, the CDC decision-making tool for cleaning and disinfection. It leads people through a flow chart and asks questions about what is their requirement, and then it gives the the answers to that. So I found that very useful. Another question, very common question from many school districts is when and where and how to store hazardous chemicals. And this is a very much of a problem now because schools are on a buying, school districts are on a buying spree. Lots of school districts have purchased more, a lot more than they would normally. A lot more of hazardous chemicals. And so naturally they have to have a plan for storage, right? They can't just store them anywhere. So I just want to share this flow charts or a plan to store these products. And I have to credit my colleague Lynn Rose for this. I listened to a great presentation by her recently about this topic, about the topic of disinfection, and she shared this. I thought this is a great resource to have. So she explains very clearly how to store the products in a shelf, for example, in that kind of, in a storage space. So that's another resource that I recommend. More questions, sources of information on safer products. So certainly there is the EPA list 10, but what are other sources of information? So there are a number of organizations that review products for health and safety considerations. And I've listed some of them here on the slide. All of those organizations have their own websites where they provide that information. So that is also something that I share. Disinfectant wipes. This is another great question that we receive a lot of, and not just before, during COVID times, disinfectant wipes have been used for a long time, and there's extensive misuse of disinfectant wipes. And this is a great infographic that I like to share when people ask that question. It explains very clearly and in simple terms about disinfectant wipes. Supplies, another very common question. What material should we use to clean? And microfiber is obviously the best choice. But the problem with microfiber is how to manage it. You buy a lot of microfiber, but how do you dispose of once it's been used? Do you just throw it away in the trash where it can pile up? Or but the better plan is to have a laundering system, and they can be reused. And the thing to remember is to launder these microfiber cloths or towels separately from other fabric, other material. And another great option to have is to use a laundering service. So some states have that facility. The laundering service will provide a certain number of microfiber cloths or towels, and they'll collect them, and give you a new set while they will launder them and disinfect them, and they'll supply. So schools don't have to buy microfiber, but just get the laundering service. So that was a great plan to have. Another common disinfection question is how to clean and disinfect high touch points and high traffic and high touch points. And there's a resource specific to this developed by Informed Green Solutions that I like to share. So that's that over there. Equipment used for disinfection. This is a very, very interesting discussion that we're currently having. A lot of schools are buying foggers, misters, and electrostatic sprayers to spray disinfectants. And this has not been common before. And the thing to remember with electrostatic sprayers is that they were first used in the paint industry. And believe it or not, paint sprayers are also being used to spray disinfectants because of their the property of the spray. And not much is known about the use of electrostatic sprayers. Really, there's so many considerations that you need to have. Fire safety, for example, they have a risk of fire when they're not used properly. And technically, you cannot use solvent-based products in them. They have to be water-based. You cannot use flammable liquids in them. Another important consideration is to have proper grounding. And I listened to a presentation by Lynn recently, where Lynn Rose, where she showed a great picture I didn't know if I could share it here. That's why I didn't use it. But the picture shows a person using an electrostatic sprayer, okay? And he's wearing gloves, okay? He has PPE, but the glove, the thumb of the glove is cut out so that, you know, there's proper grounding. So it was a very interesting picture, and it's something that people have to keep in mind, but certainly not by cutting the thumb of, you know, the glove. And another health warning by one of the makers of electrostatic sprayers is that electrostatic devices may interfere with medical devices that are installed in your body, for example, a pacemaker, and not many people are aware of that. So there are so much is unknown about the use of electrostatic sprayers that really school districts need to be thinking about before using them. So this is an interesting discussion that we are having currently. And yeah, which brings me to my next slide and about the National School IPM Network. So many of you know that this is a National School IPM working group. And currently it's because when we ran out of funding, the different regions have taken up the hosting of those monthly calls. We have calls every month. And currently the network is composed of different agencies and individuals from different, it's a very, very diverse and dynamic group. And people from universities, from federal agencies, industry, and many other organizations are part of it and engage in very active discussions. Currently, we are maintaining a list of questions regarding new questions that arise specifically with regard to this topic of disinfection in the context of COVID. I just put a little part of that list there. So we have representatives from the EPA that participate in the discussions, and they get answers to these questions. So it's a very, very important effort that's being taken up at this time. So I just want to share it. And currently we are, the Western region is hosting the National School IPM Network calls. So we hosted it in August. We'll be hosting again in September. So if anyone is interested to be part of that network, please let me know. I'll share my contact information in a second here. Yeah, that's my last slide here. Just want to share a number of resources about this particular topic, about schools in the time of COVID. I'm not going to read through all of that. It's all available on the slide. And here's my contact information. So if you have any questions about this topic, schools in the time of COVID or disinfection, please reach out. Please feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to help. Okay, I believe that's time for me, right? Matt, do we have time for a couple of questions or not?
We do have time for a quick question. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet. First off, yeah, thanks, Shaku. That was super helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Shaku? Okay, I'm not really hearing any questions. I do have a question, but it's probably a little bit more complicated. So maybe this is not really the right place for it.
So we can talk about it later.
Yeah, that would be good. Thanks, Shaku.
You know how to find me.
Yes, I do.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah, that'd be great. So our next speaker today is Anil Shrestha from Fresno State University. Anil did his undergraduate work in agriculture in Faizabad, India, and then did a master's at Cornell and a PhD at Michigan State. He is currently the Todd Einhorn Professor of Weed Science at Fresno State, and he has served on the Center Advisory Committee since, I was trying to figure this out, has it been 2014 or 2015? I think it's 2014, right, Anil?
Yeah, it's been quite a while. I'm in my second term, so
yeah,
2014, yes.
Yeah. So Anil teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in weed science and pest management, and his research focuses on integrated vegetation management in agriculture and non-agricultural systems. He currently serves on the editorial boards of Journal of Crop Improvement and then a second journal, Journal of Sustainable Agriculture. And today he's going to talk about implementing integrated pest management programs in developing and developed countries. So take it away, Anil.
I'd first like to thank the Western IPM Center for providing me this platform, and Matt and Steve who invited me to give this talk. And I'd also like to wish everyone who is on this call a safe, COVID-free environment. What I'm going to do is make a case or make a plea that integrated weed management is now sounding like empty words in the developing world. And I'll try to make that case of why I feel that way. And I'll give examples of the developed world, and also most of my examples are going to be based in South Asia, examples from Nepal in particular. So I'd start off with a brief history of weed science. I just did a quick review to see what are the things that have happened over the years as far as history of weed science goes, the exciting events. So there has not been much. We've moved from hand labor to cultivation, and then we had the Romans used salt as herbicides, and then the tractors came in. And the first synthetic herbicide came in around 1941, 2,4-D. And then in 1950, we had about 25 herbicides available. And that's when the Weed Science Society of America was formed. Then in the 70s, the big excitement was the introduction of glyphosate or Roundup. And in the 90s, we had the GMOs, herbicide-resistant crops, come in. And also late 80s, early 90s, we had the concept of integrated weed management kind of pick up momentum in North America. And in the 2010s, and even now, we have these smart robotic sprayers and cultivators as a tool in integrated weed management. And that's like in a nutshell of the whole history of weed science. Now, weed management was kind of simplified with the introduction of herbicides. There was a lot of emphasis on the use of herbicides since the inception or from the 50s onwards. And it was even more so with the genetically modified herbicide tolerant crops that came into the picture. And I was looking at the quick I should say sales. The data seems to vary quite a fair bit, but this is like from the EPA 2012. Almost 60% of the pesticide used in US is herbicides, around 57. The developing world, the FAO has a database, and they say around 46%. Now, this seems to vary from publication to publication, but the numbers are approximately, almost half the pesticide used in the US around the world are herbicides. And I found this from the industry side, the crop protection chemical market, and they are saying 40% of the market share in the world is herbicides. So, and they also say that herbicide sector is witnessing this most significant growth, and it's concentrated in countries like India and China. And I was also looking at the pesticide industry, and it's predicted to reach about 74 billion by 2027. And that shows a growth rate of 7% between 2014 and 2020. So about 50% of this projected amount is herbicides. So we're talking about roughly 37, $38 billion of herbicide in the industry. And the projection, these are projections from 2012 to 2018. And I think it still holds true that the herbicides, among all the pesticides, herbicides have experienced the highest growth rate during this period. And even in the next 6 years period, they're predicting that herbicides will be the major ones among pesticides in the market. So the rate is expected around 6.1. I saw a recent estimate of 6.7, I think 6.7 or 6.9 around that. And then followed by fungicides, 5.6%. So if you look at the use of pesticides over the years in terms of decades, you can see the insecticides seem to have gone down. Fungicides have also gone down, but herbicides are seeing an increasing trend. In 2010, data showed a slight dip, but I'm pretty sure if, when the 2020 data comes out, there will be a significant increase in the amount of herbicides used. So it looks like among all the pesticides being used in the world, herbicides seem to be taking the momentum and also increasing. And the market share is primarily North America, but there's a growing market in Asia Pacific, Europe as well, particularly East Europe is now starting to use herbicides. So although the market share is quite big again in North America, but the developing world market is picking up very rapidly. And if you look at the North American cropping systems, we've had herbicides for so long, but we still have weeds. And the question almost always comes up, why do we have those weeds? And I think we have completed a learning cycle in weed management. I often talk about this learning cycle in weed management, and I'll try to explain what I mean by that. And here's a very common and popular slide that we weed scientists like to use, the increase in glyphosate, not just glyphosate, but herbicide-resistant weeds in general. We have now 514, according to this morning's data, 514 resistant biotypes, 262 species that are now resistant to about 23 of the 26 herbicide sites of action. And that's about 93 crops in 70 countries. Now, globally, if you look at the distribution of these resistant weeds, it's no surprise that the countries that have started the herbicide use the earliest have the most number of resistant weeds. But if you look at the Asian region, this region a few years ago was kind of low, but now it has picked up, and we're seeing a fair amount of herbicide-resistant weeds in this region as well. And I can make a case of why that might be. So while in the North, in the North American context, we are asking how did we get into this situation of resistant weeds? And then the better question is, how do we get out of here? And integrated weed management is now again being emphasized. Mechanical weed control is being looked at, and other forms of weed control methods are being looked at. But if you go to the developing world, the only thing that they ask is, every trip I've made to Nepal and other regions around there, the only question I get is, isn't there a better way of weed control than hand weeding? And they ask me, what is the best chemical do you have in the arsenal in the US that we can use? So that's the only question I got. Nobody asks me about identification or biology or integrated weed management. Every question I had to face was, name an herbicide that I can use. So the CAGR predicts a 6.5% increase in the Asia Pacific region of herbicide use. So here's where my point comes in, that we started with hand weeding, then we went to animal weeding, and then we looked into mechanical weed control, and then the chemicals came in. We introduced the GMO herbicide tolerant crops, but somewhere things went wrong and we selected for herbicide resistance. And in some cases, I can speak of vineyards in California as well, where we have to now resort to hand weeding in some of the cases where we cannot get rid of weeds by herbicides. So we've been through this learning cycle, and it seems like several countries are now in different phases of this cycle, and the developing world is in this phase. Now they're starting to use chemicals, and they don't want to look back, and they don't want to go and do all the hand weeding and animal weed control and all that. And I'll give you the reason why. But my question is, do they also have to go through this learning cycle and come back to where they started? Or is there time to make some interventions now in these regions. And here's the data that we see and being tossed around of losses caused by pests, and weeds have quite a big role in that. Almost like 14, 15% of crop yield losses are caused by weeds. And we also see these numbers. This is from FAO. By 2030, the United Nations is predicting that there will be 1.7 billion more mouths to feed. And I think there's more to this than just trying to increase production. And the case I'm going to make is farming is no longer an attractive profession in these developing countries, and something has to be done to make farming a profession in these countries again. I also looked at this data that over half the world's population could rely on food imports by 2050. And this study, I think, came out from England. But my question is, who is going to produce the food? There aren't too many countries exporting the food. And the better question is, who is going to farm? And you can see that in the developing countries, the people are trying to get out of farming. All the males, especially the young ones, are getting out of farming. And this picture is from China. This one's from India. This is from Africa, Ethiopia, I think. And then this is from Nepal. And I saw this picture in the news in Nepal. About 4.3 million youth immigrated to foreign countries. And these are like people lining up to take the Korean language test to go to South Korea as workers. So if you go to these villages in Nepal, you will not find any male above 16 years. They'll either be like 55 years or older, or even 60 years or older, or very young. So there's only children and old people and women left in the farms. And even the women are now getting permits to work in other countries in Nepal. And I asked folks in Bangladesh, and it's the same there. And India also, not quite foreign immigration, but they're moving to cities. So there's a huge shortage of labor in agriculture. And you can see the data for South Asia here. There's a steep decline. China has the steepest decline. And then for every region, there's a steep decline in labor in agriculture. And here's another slide from the Crop Life Foundation. Half the fields in Africa don't get planted because of weeds. And then I saw this from Dennis Avery, add herbicides to Africa's rescue plan. So here's why I think that herbicides are going to be taking over these regions, and integrated weed management is just going to be empty words. So the question is, should these developing countries get on the herbicide treadmill when we are trying to figure out how to get off this treadmill? And I think it's too late for the developing countries. The era of chemical weed management has begun in the developing world. And this is what we see. This is from Nepal. And you can see that there's barely any PPE there. And I'm not even sure what he's spraying in this case. And here's another graph from Bangladesh, where the decline in labor has resulted in a steep increase in herbicide use. So same thing with India. This year they had good rains, and on the other hand, they had labor shortage. So the herbicide usage went up, and it's going to go up. If you look at the projections from India, they have like almost close to 8-9% increase. I saw some data which projected even 25% increase in herbicide use in this country, in India. Now, this is a region I used to work in, Nepal. And this place used to be very vibrant. It's a tea garden with human labor, women singing and pulling out weeds. And it was a different environment. All I saw was one person going around with a sprayer. And I asked him what he was spraying, and he said glyphosate. And I asked him how many times does he spray, and he said 3 to 4 times a year. And I also asked him, like, do you get good control of weeds with glyphosate? And he said, well, these days they are manufacturing, like fake glyphosate. It doesn't control weeds anymore. So I was thinking maybe they already have resistant weeds there. And it's no surprise that glyphosate and paraquat are like the leading herbicides in these countries. And this is for the general use, but for weeds in rice systems, we have the ALS inhibitors. And this is what you see in Nepal and also in India, in Bangladesh, same thing. People mixing herbicides and getting ready to spray. So again, you see no PPE at all. This guy's wearing an apron, but that's about it. So this is from Africa. The training now, instead of integrated practices, is basically how to use herbicides, how to calibrate sprayers, and how to control weeds with herbicides. So the principles of IWM are just empty words for these people. And this is a tomato field in Nepal, again, where they had an invasion of Orobanki. And when they realized that I was going to visit, they came up with a spelling for glyphosate. And that's what they had applied there. And they said they were getting no control of that particular weed. And I asked them, like, are there any alternates? They said, well, as long as it's an herbicide, we're willing to adopt, but we are not willing to adopt any other practices that require laborious practices. And then in these villages, it's sad that in Nepal, you won't find a health center for people, but you will find these, what they call agrovet stores. So these are the stores that sell pesticides, and untrained people run these stores. So these people are ahead of government scientists, and they make recommendations. And this was the herbicide that a 13-year-old guy kind of recommended to me when I said I had weeds in the rice system. So, like the genie is already out of the bottle. And there was this farmer, his field was taken over by Pistia. It's an aquatic weed, it's a rice field. And I was talking with him, like, what has he done? And if he has tried hand weeding. And then he said, that's like 1 week of hand removal, and he's tired. He said he doesn't want to do hand weeding anymore. One is he doesn't have any labor. He's the only one taking care of that field, and he wants pesticides, in fact, herbicides. And there's a simple answer to this: crop rotation. But then they say, the villagers say, that it's not a possibility because rice is the only crop that brings money to them. The other crops doesn't pay. So here we have extension agents, untrained, not knowing anything about herbicides, modes of action, or anything like that. And they are distributing sprayers and chemicals. And this is the way they are spraying. And this was a rice herbicide being sprayed in this rice field. And you can almost imagine where that is going to end up, or what's going to happen to that herbicide there. And the other problem I see is these donor governments also trying to promote commercial farming. So this is USAID promoting commercial farming. The World Bank is promoting commercial farming. Commercial farming in their model has the pesticide distributors also there. So they are taking over. And this is a field in eastern Nepal of cabbage. And you can see there's a lot of weeds there. And they said they can afford hand weeding because it pays to do hand weeding. But if they had a choice, they said they would rather spray than spend money on herbicides. So the constraints to herbicides, this is from Genesi and Williams: lack of awareness and training, inadequate knowledge of herbicides, lack of extension services, lack of availability of herbicides, and the biggest one, I think, is lack of trained weed scientists. And they project, the same people from that center there, project that the herbicide market grew by about 39% and is projected to grow by another 11% by 2016. This was an older paper, and I think it did happen. And they also projected that herbicide use will increase in sub-Saharan Africa, and again, basically due to labor shortages. And many parts of the world, herbicides are being increasingly replaced by tillage, like China, India, Bangladesh. These are the hotbeds because of lack of labor. chemical sales agents are ahead of extension agents in promoting herbicides. And I think instead of focusing solely on IWM, it's time to focus on herbicide management and teach these people resistance management, herbicide safety, because that's probably the first step that these developing countries need. The other thing that's happening is promotion of direct seeded rice or no-till type of rice system. These are, again, herbicide dependent systems, and that's what they're using. So they're using herbicides in this direct seeded rice systems. So I think we were in the crossroads in the 21st century, and I don't know if it's necessary for these developing countries to go through the learning cycle. And the question comes, what sort of integrated management programs should the developing countries focus on? And you see these models, but this, I feel, is becoming just empty words. And if you look at the land holding, that's going down, and that's also an impediment to use of integrated practices. And again, is a good abstract of the future of weed science. And these, again, are empty words to me after having experienced firsthand field visits, that these are good things to say, but in reality, this is what's happening. And even the tools that they're developing are not women friendly, because that's who is left in the villages for the weed control or even farming. The reason I say it's not women friendly is not because they're physically weak or something, it's just the way the culture, the dress does not go with these mechanical tools. So I like this slide or quote from National Geographic that says the main challenge facing us in helping farmers is not in creating low-tech or high-tech solutions for the problems, but in providing appropriate knowledge that works and is useful for farmers on the land they farm. So in conclusion, I think chemical weed management has begun in these developing countries, and the trend is difficult to stop. And I think they should not repeat the mistakes that we've made. And IWM approach it will only work if herbicide is part of it. And alternate weed controls will have to be women friendly, energy efficient, and the academic side of universities and all that should also have weed science programs. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if I have any questions.
Thanks, Anil. That was really terrific. I'm not seeing any questions yet in the chat, so let's see if anybody has a question from the audience.
Hi, Anil. I have a quick question.
Yes.
So for the extension agents that you say work within those regions, who are they working for?
They are government extension agents, but they don't really have any research backup. So they also kind of follow the instructions that the chemical agents and these chemical salespeople give them.
So still very much driven by the chemical industry and
yes.
Interesting.
I don't have a question really, just a comment. Al Fournier from University of Arizona. I think it's a really interesting sort of analysis that you've done there. And I think it's kind of a shame if some of these countries can't learn from our mistakes and implement proactive kinds of strategies in terms of resistance management. But at the same time, the cultural and I guess economic issues that you've sort of laid out, it really poses some pretty significant challenges. So I don't know if there's any thought or incentive, like among Weed Science Society or other groups, to try to do some kind of international brainstorming, on these kinds of issues. And that would bring in sort of the stakeholders and some realistic kinds of on-the-ground information that could help to inform potential solutions.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions? Jim.
It's Jim. I have a question based on the lack of PPE. Is there a recognition of the health impacts of spraying without PPE, or do you see widespread health impacts on the agricultural laborers?
I think they do see health impacts, but they're not ready to admit it. There's two things with PPE. It costs them quite a fair bit. And the other thing is the climate. The humidity makes PPE quite difficult to wear. And that's the other issue in their case.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions. I just want to thank both our speakers for their presentations today, which were both excellent. I also want to remind everyone that the recordings of these presentations will be available through the website, through the Western IPM website, in case you want to go and review anything that was discussed today. And finally, I just want to remind everyone that the next IPM hour will be, let's see, I know it's going to be in beginning October. Not exactly sure if we have a date yet, but it'll probably be the second Wednesday in October.
14th.
Sorry?
The second Wednesday is October 14th.
Yeah, I have it listed as the 14th of October. So hopefully you can all join that webinar as well. You will see a newsletter piece about the upcoming webinar, October webinar, in the October newsletter. And thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe.